dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I continue to be Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation's national security correspondent, Dave Patterson. Now, Dave, I want to move on from talking about the defense bill budget and talk about something that happened this week, and that was that Tucker Carlson had was quite a rare interview, I guess, for Western media with the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. And that came out on Monday. What was your overall take on that?
Well, I think that I listened to it, and I thought that okay, kudos to Carlson for getting the interview, and but I think he lost an opportunity to be far more probing, and pretty much let the Iranian president filibuster, if you will, talking about his point of view. If you wanted to synthesize what was said, U.S. good except when supporting Israel, U.S. bad, Israel always bad. And so, surprise, surprise, very, very little that could not have been predicted. But I think also that Tucker Carlson did not have, as I mentioned, as probing of questions as he might have otherwise, and then he didn't push back when things were obviously, propaganda being shoved his way.
Right. So that's he started off with basically three premises, right? What's Iran's goal? What does Iran think of America, and what does Iran think of Israel? The last one there, what does Iran think of Israel? I think no interview necessary to know what Iran thinks of Israel.
Yeah. That's true, and the whole idea, the premise that his motivation for doing the interview was to ensure that the people of the United States had an accurate perception of what Iran was, what they think, and what their leadership is about. And yet, you have to ask yourself, okay, you didn't ask any knock them down dead questions,
Sure.
so. The kinds of things that Americans would really want to know is, why do you say this when it's absolutely not true, and we all know that? But he didn't push back on those kinds of things. So whether or not Americans were really informed, remains to be seen. There are things that were self-evident, like, what do you think of Israel? Well, duh.
Yeah.
You don't go out saying death to Israel and send them Christmas presents.
Sure. However, they do also say death to America, right?
Yeah, and so but he had a very interesting response to that,
okay.
and one that's that kind of pushes the limits of credibility and credulity, both those C words. And he said, "Well, we really don't mean death to the American people. That's not what we mean. What we really mean is, death to basically the behavior, the kinds of threats and all of this kind of stuff that come from the United States. And so we're really not meaning death to Americans, but to the kinds of things that we all hate, right? We all hate these things." And
right. Yeah, it's so for me, there's something about motivations that I find most interesting, because let's be clear, you wrote about, before the interview came out, you wrote about what you can expect from this, and for all intents and purposes, you nailed it. That's what we got. You can read Dave's. I don't want to call it a prediction. Dave Cassandra Patterson. But I did the Delphic Oracle of National Security. So please, listeners, do go and check out what Dave set forth was probably going to happen. And he was pretty right on that, I think. But as to motivations, now, I'm really just formulating ideas here on this, but I think from both sides, there's a couple of motivations. Number one, Tucker Carlson wanted to interview somebody that nobody else would interview. And he did that. Or nobody else could interview as well. Because the Iranian president, it's not like he's off doing The View or going on MSNBC. So for him, it was, I got to get this guy in and I want to ask the questions. And he knew full well that if he asked a question, I mean, this is my opinion on this. I might have it entirely wrong, but this is how it seems to me. My analysis on it is that if he'd asked a question that would have stumped the president, or as you say, well, that's clearly a lie. Why not tell us the truth? That would have been the end of the interview, because
That's correct.
they don't owe Tucker Carlson anything, right?
Right.
And then from President Pezeshkian's side, I think, and again, I might have this wrong, but it seems to me that it's an overture before peace.
I think you could actually make that case that he's kind of testing the waters, what will be the outcome. Now, because of his basic inclination to obfuscate and not really put the truth.
He's a politician.
Yeah, and so he runs the risk of that getting in the way of whatever he intends to do. But if I were to make one point here, and it's a bit of a criticism. No, it actually is a criticism, not a bit of one. With Carlson, is that he makes the point in his teaser that he has invited Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to the same kind of an interview.
Sure.
And then I got to say, wait a second. What you're doing here is you're establishing some sort of moral equivalence between this horrific state, Iran, that is the number one purveyor of terrorism all over the world, with Israel. No, that does not work. You have to have some other way of bringing an alternative view. You cannot bring the Prime Minister of Israel, which the United States stands behind, as some at least paragon of right versus evil, and put him on the stage with evil. That does not work.
Again, devil's advocate here. I would say that if I were the Iranian president, I would say that, we are equivalent. And therefore, to get the interview, you've got to put that equivalence forward.
Well, then there is the alternative. I don't need that much of that interview that much.
And then nobody gets to hear. Otherwise, what do we get to hear? We get to hear nothing but what comes out of Iranian state-owned media.
But now you get to hear.
You could argue that that's pretty much what we got.
That's what you got. Yeah, you get the state-owned media talking points.
Sure.
Only they get to be on Tucker Carlson's platform.
But doesn't that ignore that we both agree is an overture towards peace, and isn't that really what is the ideal goal?
Well, I think that remains to be seen.
Sure.
But it does not take away from the basic criticism that you cannot have this moral equivalency.
Sure.
And push that, because that's what comes across. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is of the same moral stature as these murderers in Iran. No, that does not work.
Dave Patterson, strong words, strong opinions, and as always, great analysis. Thanks for being here, Dave.
Thank you, Mark.
And that, dear listeners, is about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I'd like to first thank our guests for joining us today, and then leave you with a final thought. So, Andrew Moran, economics editor at libertynation.com, and Dave Patterson, national security correspondent. Thank you both for taking the time to come in and join us. And of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to join us. So my parting thought for this week, based on what we've been discussing today. Ronald Reagan, speaking in 1982, when rededicating a warship, he said, quote, "When we've taken up arms, it has been for the defense of freedom, for ourselves and for other peaceful nations who needed our help. But now, faced with the development of weapons of immense destructive power, we have no choice but to maintain ready defense forces that are second to none. Yes, the cost is high, but the price of neglect would be infinitely higher." End quote. And I think And I'm sure, in fact, what Reagan was getting at there is that there's an ever-changing threat in the world, and the ideals that were once held are now being usurped by current situations, and new threats call for new attitudes. But also, Ronald Reagan was very much the pragmatist, and he understood that the values that founded the nation, that have held the nation together over so many years and through so much, need to remain as strong as they ever did. Just something to think about. Thank you for being here. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.